I mean, she was just an amazing person to begin with, being such a good friend and getting you through these tough times and these crazy times. I mean, the Marine Corps was, not an easy thing to do, man or woman. It just isn't. That's why, once a Marine, always a Marine. And then just the being frightened for her and being confused.
A Marine colonel recalls a friend from early in her long career to tell us a story of loyalty, mystery, and murder. Hello, and welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. Marine colonels are rare. Female Marines are hard to come by, too. And a female Marine colonel, well, that's a story in itself. Today, I'll speak with Kathleen Harrison, a retired Marine 06. Kathleen is the author of today's tale, Shirley, where she remembers another female Marine who met a mysterious and eventually terrifying ending. Afterwards, Kathleen and I will talk about her life and times in the Corps. Let's listen to Shirley, read by Ennis Kristiansen.
I met Shirley Gibbs at Officer Candidate School on June 9th, 1980, in Quantico, Virginia. Shirley's appearance was striking. She stood 5 foot 11 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds. Her skin was dark and clear, her eyes were big and brown, and she had a smile. That smile, it was a big, wide, toothy smile that warmed your soul. That girl loved to mess with people. Someone would say, "Hey, Shirley," and she would give you a look of disapproval. Then, as you started to apologize, she would laugh a big, hearty laugh. Quantico in the summer is not a pleasant place to be because of its sultry summers, especially without air conditioning. It didn't seem to bother Shirley, who hailed from Burton, South Carolina. As a Buckeye, I felt like I was sweating constantly, even after a shower. When I complained one time, Shirley said, "Ladies don't sweat. We glisten." And she laughed, that big, hearty laugh of hers. I chuckled to myself and think, oh my God, Shirley. According to the Marine Corps website, the mission of the Officer Candidate School is to educate and train officer candidates in Marine Corps knowledge and skills within a controlled and challenging environment in order to evaluate and screen individuals for the leadership, moral, mental, and physical qualities required for commissioning as a Marine Corps officer. Shirley and I saw it differently. OCS was a necessary evil to endure so the Marine Corps would pay for our college. So while we agreed to do our best, we weren't going to engage in cutthroat tactics to make it through as a part of 6th Platoon C Company OCS. A few in the platoon were so competitive that they wrote untrue negative comments on the peer evaluation so they could be rated in the top of the platoon. Shirley and I knew these tactics would backfire in the end. The 6th Platoon Sergeant marched us around everywhere. Gunnery Sergeant Mercer, known as the platoon sergeant, was there to guide us. Shirley and I saw that differently as well. The platoon sergeant was there to create chaos and exert pressure to see what we would do. The 29 candidates lined up many times each day according to height. We formed into 10 across and 3 rows deep. Before we started to march, we all turned to the left so that the formation marched 3 across and 10 deep. Shirley and I were the tallest, so we were at the back. Shirley loved to tell jokes while we marched, and she could talk without moving her lips. She was so funny that one time I just couldn't help myself but laugh out loud. Platoon Sergeant screamed at me and threw me out of formation and wrote a chit. The chit is a report, good or bad. This one was bad. Laughing in formation. Instructed on the importance of bearing and self-discipline, you not only bring attention to yourself, but to every woman in the platoon. All I could think was, oh my God, Shirley. 10 weeks later, we finished OCS. Shirley and I bid our farewells until next summer and returned to our respective colleges to finish our senior year. After college graduation, we were ordered to report to Quantico by the 10th of September 1981, this time for 6 months of the basic school. According to the Marine Corps website, the mission of the basic school is, quote, To train and educate newly commissioned or appointed officers in the high standards of professional knowledge, esprit de corps, and leadership to prepare them for duty as company-grade officers in the operating forces, with particular emphasis on the duties, responsibilities, and war-fighting skills required of a rifle platoon commander. Yeah, right. Except women weren't allowed to fight, to be in combat. This was known as the combat exclusion policy. That's only one of the multitude of reasons why most of us referred to TBS as, quote, the bullshit school, end quote. Second lieutenants were supposed to be treated as officers. Females were supposed to be treated equal. It didn't take long to realize that, at least during TBS, neither would be adhered to consistently. Shirley lived in a suite across and to the left of mine, so we saw each other often. We commiserated about disparity between the ways the Marine Corps advertised proper officer conduct and what was condoned. It was consoling to have found a kindred spirit in Shirley. The challenges of TBS were constant and numerous, so you have to remember that TBS is a marathon. You wanted to do well because TBS is where you are given your military occupation specialty, which is meted out according to your class standing. Many MOSs were closed to women because of the combat exclusion policy, and the macho Marine Corps was only too happy to enforce it. That didn't matter to Shirley, as she wanted to go into administration. I, on the other hand, wanted to go into intelligence. We went to class, took exams, endured physical fitness tests, and participated in field exercises. Before we knew it, it was Christmas break. I was going to Florida to meet my brother, who was stationed in Jacksonville. Shirley volunteered to help with the driving so she could get dropped off near Savannah, Georgia, where her family lived. I was only too happy to share my driving with her. The roads were icy in several places and traffic was slower than usual, but the first 5 hours went without incident. I was bone tired, so I woke Shirley up so she could drive for a couple of hours. That's when she told me she couldn't drive a stick shift. "Are you kidding me?" She responded, "No, but I have an idea." My eyelids were heavy, and all I wanted was to let them close. I pushed my seat back as far as I could, and Shirley, all 5 feet 11 of her, crawled into my lap. Then I, at 5 feet 10, crawled out from under her and got over the stick shift into the passenger seat. Oh yeah, all this while going 70 miles per hour on the freeway. I fell asleep for a couple of hours until Shirley told me she needed to take the next exit. I told her to stop when she got to the stop sign and we would switch. As she hit the brakes for the stop sign, we jerked a little and the engine died. We ran a Chinese fire drill and I started the engine. Her parents were going to meet her at the McDonald's, so we wished each other a Merry Christmas and I drove off. Oh my God, Shirley. After Christmas break, we had less than 2 months left until graduation. We had more classes, exams, physical fitness tests, and field exercises. The interesting thing about field exercises is that women were not allowed to take offensive positions, only defensive positions. This meant a lot of digging and then waiting. You had to dig your own foxhole, officially called a defensive fighting position. This hole in the ground was big enough for 2 people to kneel in, with your weapon on solid ground, and defend themselves against enemy fire as well as provide a firing point. All this training was leading up to the 3-day war in February 1982. Shirley and I were assigned our position to dig a foxhole, and we were happy to get that done. One of the training officers pushed the boundaries and told me that I was going out on patrol, which left Shirley to stand guard in the foxhole. I was out patrolling for several hours when the weather took a turn for the worst. It had started raining, and it didn't let up. Then the temperature dropped rapidly, and ice began to form on the ground. After my patrol was over, I returned to our foxhole. I could tell something was wrong with Shirley. She was kneeling in waist-high water. Her lips were blue, and she was blabbing, "I tried to keep it dry. I tried to keep it dry. I tried to keep it dry. Oh my God, Shirley!" She was suffering from hypothermia, and I knew I had to get her out of the foxhole fast. I grabbed her jacket collar to lift her out, but she was dead weight. She was weak and so heavy and slippery from the muddy ice water. Several times I snagged a piece of her clothing and attempted to haul her out, but I lost my footing in the sloppy mess at the rim of the foxhole. Finally, I managed to drag her upper body out before I had to regroup. With her legs still dangling in the water, I snatched her by the belt and pulled the rest of her out of the foxhole. I opened my sleeping bag and made her get in with me to get her body temperature up. Just as I got her to stop shivering and babbling, the hard-nosed training officer came over to check our field of fire. The field of fire of a weapon is the area around it that can easily and effectively be reached by gunfire. I assured him that we had excellent field of fire, but he insisted that we get out of the sleeping bag. There was no use explaining the situation about Shirley to that one. As soon as he left, I got her sleeping bag out, and in it we went with my M16 rifle sticking out. I was so angry, I kept thinking the training officer was lucky these rounds were only tracers. Within an hour, the, quote, war was over after only a day and a half. Our company suffered a 50% casualty rate due to hypothermia. Although most recovered before our graduation on February 28th, one guy was still in a coma when we left. Shirley and I both got our respective wishes for MOS. She received administration and I obtained intelligence. We knew it would be a while until we saw each other again. I had orders to California and she had orders to North Carolina, but it didn't matter. In the military, you were often separated from your friends. You learned to pick up where you left off, as if no time passed at all. I didn't see Shirley again until February 1989 in Quantico, 7 years after TBS graduation. By that time, we were both captains and looking hopefully at the possibility of promotion to major. She was the administration officer at TBS. I was the Marine Corps Assistant Foreign Liaison Officer at the Navy Annex in Arlington, Virginia. Shirley helped me coordinate a visit by the German federal minister who was looking to incorporate women into the German military. The diplomatic party was able to see women in training, which had progressed a little since we were at TBS. The combat exclusion policy was still in effect. The big advancement was that we finally had our first female general in 1985. I made plans with Shirley to go out to dinner the next week. We were supposed to meet on Friday, March 3rd, 1989. I called Shirley to delay a day until March 4th, and she was fine with that. Normally, Shirley was upbeat and joking, but our conversation was strained. Her words were so guarded. Shirley told me she was separated from her husband after 18 months of marriage, and that she would tell me more when she saw me. Her voice was tremulous, and I could tell she was scared of something, which struck me as odd because I never knew Shirley to be afraid of anything. She had moved out of her Quantico married officer's on-base house and was staying with another female friend from our TBS class, Annie Mack. We said our goodbyes, and I looked forward to catching up with my old friend. But Shirley never showed up the next evening. I called Shirley at Annie's the next day to see what happened. Annie told me that Shirley met her husband to clean out their quarters on March 4th, and she hadn't been seen since that time. She had picked up the final version of her marital separation agreement on Friday and put a down payment on a condominium. Shirley's estranged husband was stalking her and using listening devices to keep tabs on her. He had numerous affairs, drank to excess, and recently received an other-than-honorable discharge from the Marine Corps. He was relieved of his duties for drinking on duty, dereliction of duty, and defrauding the government. Oh my God, Shirley! I was in a state of shock. I couldn't comprehend how Shirley could be involved in this mess. I kept wondering, where could she possibly be? Annie had called the Naval Investigative Service to report Shirley missing. I called them too and left a message to tell them about my conversation with Shirley, but they never returned my call. Shirley had gone to help clean up her old quarters to prepare for the official housing inspection scheduled for some time later. This inspection was very picky regarding washing and dusting everything possible. Although this was a white glove inspection, quarters were expected to be clean, not perfect. Unless there were holes in the walls that were repaired, there was no need to paint. According to her husband, Robert, He last saw Shirley when she left the residence to walk to a store 5 miles away to buy paint in 40-degree weather. This didn't make sense. Why would Shirley walk to the store, especially in the cold? Days passed, and no one saw Shirley. A criminal investigation commenced, revealing Shirley's passport and driver's license had vanished as well. Her credit cards and bank accounts were never accessed. All of the property she had placed in storage remained there. Foul play was suspected due to the circumstances involved. Her husband contended Shirley left on her own accord because she was tired of military life. Preposterous. Shirley's husband was convicted of her murder in 1991 and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The case against him was circumstantial. Prosecutors said that Robert shot Shirley with a .25 caliber pistol while they were in the storage shed next to the base house, then dismembered her body and dumped her remains in a mine shaft in rural Pennsylvania. The murder weapon that Robert purchased was never located, although he had purchased it only a few days before Shirley's disappearance. Shirley has never been located. Robert wrote a 26-step recipe for murder on his computer, which the prosecution used to convince the jury that Robert murdered Shirley. A former lover who had an affair with Robert testified that Robert told her he wanted to murder his wife. Robert has made numerous attempts to overturn his conviction, all of which have been rejected. He filed several times to get a new trial because newly discovered evidence would prove his innocence in the killing of Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell. They have been rejected on the merits. His last filing was rejected in 2015. I was robbed of a much-anticipated reunion with a dear friend. My hope is that Robert will finally tell the truth, so Shirley will get a proper burial with military honors, the playing of taps to honor the extinguishing of her life, the removal of the American flag from the casket, and ceremonial folding of it so it can be presented to the next of kin with an expression of gratitude for the sacrifice she made. I have not seen any of the 3 television specials about her murder because I want to remember to celebrate her life. Sometimes my heart weeps for an old friend, but I like to remember those other times. I want a moment to say to myself as I smile, "Oh my God, Shirley."
I'm joined by Kathleen Harrison, the author of Shirley. Kathleen, you're in Northern Virginia. We played this for you on Zoom, and I watched your face while you were listening to your story, Shirley, and your recollections of your old friend. And your expressions were vivid and one-for-one steps with the progress of that story. You started out just beaming and remembering your friend, and then as it turned dark, your expressions turned dark. Yet at the end, when there's that last final, "Oh, Shirley," you gave kind of a sad smile, a lovely goodbye smile. For our audience, by the way, I'd like it noted that that beautiful reading was also our engineer, Ennis Kristiansen, who's an old friend of yours.
Yes.
He just was adamant about wanting to read your work. So,
Yay.
yeah, thumbs up. But that beautiful reprise, that leitmotif through the piece of "Oh, Shirley," every time I heard "Oh, Shirley," it was a different inflection. What are you saying when you say "Oh, Shirley"? Tell me in your heart and in your memory what that phrase means to you and why you chose that to be the theme.
As you said, it has different intonations and meanings throughout. And it just seemed to invoke her more positive memories by doing that way. I mean, she was just an amazing person to begin with, being such a good friend and getting you through these tough times and these crazy times. I mean, the Marine Corps was, not an easy thing to do, man or woman. It just isn't. That's why, once a Marine, always a Marine, because we have that shared commonality. And then just the being frightened for her and being confused. And at the end, it was just, to me, a final synopsis of a reminder to remember her life and celebrate her life.
You finished your career as a full Colonel '06 in the Marine Corps,
Yes.
which makes you a little bit of a unicorn because A, you're a female Marine.
Yes.
B, you're a Marine Colonel. C, you're a female Marine Colonel. And I know you to be badass, of course. So the first thing I want to ask you is your opinion of the combat exclusion policy. You're among the people I would like to have stand in front of me with a weapon, Kathleen. So talk to me about the combat exclusion policy today. What do you think?
It is gone now, thankfully, as it should be, because if you're going to do a job, you should have all avenues open to you. There shouldn't be, oh, but this, oh, but that. And so, yes, it's sad that we have, lost females in all branches of service in combat now, but this is a volunteer force. And going into it, this is a possibility. At the time when there was a combat exclusion policy, unfortunately, it could curtail your advancement. Not everybody was going to go to combat. Okay. And so the fact you could or could not go to combat, you knew that you were going to be given lesser opportunities. Now, that's not to say if you didn't go to combat, you would not get promoted, you would not advance, you would not get the experiences. But if you can't even have the opportunity, that's a different thing. And so to me, if you're doing everything, you're meeting all the requirements, you should be given the equal opportunity. And that's a lot of the problem, is not the equity. It was more equal than not. Some, but there wasn't full equity.
Yeah. What year was the policy changed? And do you remember your reaction when you heard?
I don't remember exactly. It might actually have been after I retired. I know that to me, it was near the end, and so it really didn't make such a difference. I do remember that when I was in Panama and I was shot at, I was told I was not allowed to tell anybody that I was shot at because the combat exclusions policy was still in effect. I was like, okay, how does that work?
Wait, but you were trained in defensive positions.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Getting shot at, I think, qualifies as defensive.
Exactly. And coincidentally, the person at the basic school that had the best shooting skills was a female. And a lot of us female were really good, including myself. So yeah, it was interesting.
Well, talk to me now about being a female Marine coming up through the ranks of the Marine Corps. I mean, it's the Marines. And you've fought and clawed and white-knuckled your way to becoming a colonel, a full-bird colonel in the Marine Corps. So it's kind of singular. So if you can, juxtapose for me your experience in the Marine Corps versus the Kathleen who might be entering the Marine Corps right now. I'm sure they're very different, but can you describe that difference for me? It must be massive.
Yes and no. First of all, the numbers have not increased substantially, the number of female Marines in the Marine Corps. And I do firmly believe that there is strength in numbers. Unlike the other services where it's a much larger proportion of women, we're just not there yet. Even though all the specialties and jobs are open to women now, there's a certain amount of physicality that you have to have that, physiologically, a lot of women can't. They won't be able to meet the standards of infantry, and that's okay. A standard is a standard. But yes, there was a lot of staring at me in as I was coming up the ranks because, as you say, people had not seen a female officer, let alone a more senior female officer. I think the thing is you have to be extremely strong and pretty self-assured, not completely, because none of us are. We're always, going through that in order to be a successful female in the Marine Corps. I did not ever expect to make it a career. I'd resigned my commission several times and then pulled my resignation to stay in the Marine Corps because of other opportunities I was then given. So I'm kind of a unique situation, not only being a female Marine colonel, but just my career was, if I had not experienced it, I would read my career and go, yeah, I don't think so.
I'm always trying to understand you and a lot of the other women that have come through the Mighty Pen. All of you are such remarkable people. But you alone, I think, have done the best job for me explaining who becomes a female Marine colonel. And that is the story of your father and the baseball bat.
Oh my, yes.
So would you tell that? To this day, it's one of the more remarkable stories I've read because it's weird and it's prescient. It kind of predicts who you would become
Yeah.
when you were like, what, 10 or 12? Tell that story.
So, a little tiny background is my dad was in the Army as an air trooper, paratrooper. And so we were kind of brought up as his little soldiers. So there were some neighborhood guys that were picking on my brother, that my brother's 3.5 years younger than I. And these guys were my age, or maybe a year younger. First of all, they have more strength than he has. Second of all, they're older than him. And there's numbers, right? They have like 3-on-1. That's not cool. So my dad said, Kathleen, here's a bat. I want you to knock some heads. And if you bring blood back on the bat, I'll pay you $10.
He put a bounty. He put a bounty.
He put a bounty on there, right? So, it's not like I really wanted to do this, but it was inferred that if I didn't do it, I might get the bat. And I preferred wielding the bat than getting the bat.
Their blood, not yours.
Thank you.
Yes. That's a Marine motto, I think.
Right?
Someone else's blood.
Someone else's blood. My dad had actually called the parents and said, hey, this is happening. Could we, talk to your sons and let's chill out? And it's like, oh, well, boys will be boys. So these boys were out harassing my brother, and I went out and got my bat and I cracked heads.
Girls will be girls too, right?
Well, that was after, because once I cracked them, then their parents called my dad, right? And said, oh, do you know what your daughter did? And that was his response. Girls will be girls.
Sweet. Yeah. I love that story. Now, if you're out there listening to this and you're a female and you want to be a Marine, I think this is pretty much a great path straight to being a Marine officer in your own unicorn, right? I mean, or don't follow that path. I don't know that any story fits better my understanding of an individual as that story does fit you. You're just badass, Kathleen, and a lovely, open-hearted, good, kind person. So, Kathleen, I asked this question of all the Marines I interview. I want to know, what is a Marine? Why are you cats different?
I think the largest difference between the Marines and the other services is we all go through the same basic training. You go in as an officer, you're trained to be a platoon commander. It was interesting because even with the combat exclusion policy, right, in theory, especially in an urban environment, if you happen to be there in support and the platoon commander's killed, you would take over. Doesn't matter what your specialty is. And all Marine enlisted are trained to be riflemen. It doesn't matter. So you have that commonality where you're trained to be combat. That's what draws us together, that we have that same common basic training. And then, at the end of the day, regardless if you served for a year or 40 years, once a Marine, always a Marine, because you have that common ethos.
So there's that old saying.
Yeah.
That there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. There's just former Marines.
Yes.
Every Marine I've ever talked to, no matter how old, is a Marine.
Yes, absolutely.
Last question. So you were an intelligence officer. Walk me through that quickly.
So, I mean, there's various sources of intelligence. So you have to synthesize those various sources. You have to evaluate the validity of those sources because some are more trustworthy than others. And then hopefully you can describe the picture for your commander, what's going on at the other side, to give them anticipatory information in order to counter what could be coming up. And depending on what the mission is and where you are, it could be a shorter term, meaning tactical over the hill, or it could be longer term, meaning strategic 10 years from now.
Kathleen Harrison, give me a final thought on Shirley Gibbs.
I just hope that I hope that she's always remembered as the fun, loving, hardworking, trustworthy Marine that she was.
And that she gets proper military honors for her burial.
That would be the ultimate, yes.
Yeah. Kathleen, thank you for your time. Always thank you for your service and your friendship to me and the Mighty Pen.
I appreciate it. And thank you, David, for putting these programs together. It really has made a difference in my life personally and so many other lives that I've met through the program. So I appreciate it very much.
I wouldn't have met you any other way, Kathleen. Take care, my friend.
Thank you.
The Mighty Pen is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best write and tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's story and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen podcast. It's an honor. Aw.
Aw.
Right. Aw.